Hey everybody! In this video we are going to be talking about some advanced modification commands that we haven't learned yet. And just as a reminder, we are working on Module 8 and we're going to be talking about fillet and chamfer, polygon and polylines, trim, extend, mirror, stretch, and grips. We've already talked about mirror, so I don't think we'll go over that very much. Point, divide, and measure. Okay? Oh, one thing I want to remind you of. We will be talking about these commands in video format, but also under the reading section of our module here, you will see our commands. So if you click on those, you'll get a PDF. And if you look at that PDF, you can see fillet and chamfer, right? So here are all of the commands and sort of how they function, right? All that good stuff, okay? All right. So let's talk about some of these commands, all right? And I'm going to move through them rather quickly because we have quite a few to go through. But just know that, of course, you can always view this video just as many times as you would like, rewinding and pausing and making me talk very fast or very slow. So let's talk about, I want to talk actually about trim and extend first, okay? Because this is going to be something I've mentioned to you before. I've said things like, hey, we don't know the command to do this yet, but we will be learning it very soon, okay? And trim and extend are those commands, okay? So in our exercise here, you can see these little wall segments, all right? And this wall segment it's orthogonal, right? It comes together at a 90-degree angle. And at the corners, this is all very nice and cleaned up. It's continuous, it comes down, it turns to the left. It looks like a wall should, okay? These line segments appear as if they should come and meet very nicely, but they don't quite, all right? This exact condition is seen over here on this little floor plan, okay? Now, what I'm trying to illustrate here, let me just draw a quick little line over here, okay? What I'm trying to illustrate is something we have talked about, and let's see, there we go. You've used the offset command before, obviously. Offset 5 and 1/2 inches, enter. And if you were to offset these individual lines, right, to create this floor plan, you would get something that looks somewhat like this, right? And we've talked about how, you know, we need to clean those kind of things up so that they do indeed look like this, because this is the proper way that this needs to look, okay? Trim and extend, they're going to help you achieve this, all right? Now, of course, you could say, well, if I draw this with a polyline, I wouldn't have to do that. And that's correct. But you can't always draw a polyline for every single condition that you need to illustrate. So this is a really good modification tool to help you achieve what you need in a clean manner. So let's talk about trim first, okay? So I'm going to show you how trim and extend work over here on these circles, all right? And then we'll go back over to the wall scenario and we will complete it, okay? So let's start out with trim, all right? Trim, I'm going to show you the fast way and then the long way of using trim, but I'm going to preface it by saying I never use the long way, okay? I always use the quick version of this command, okay? So trim, let's see, we have trim, and if I drop down, we have extend, okay? So what trim does is it will allow you to take something and trim it off, right? So for example, we have this line, and they're sort of overhanging this circle, and we don't want those pieces. Well, we're going to trim them off, okay? So we can click on the trim command here. I can also hit TR, okay? And the very quick way of using this command is to type in TR with 2 enters. And it's important that you hit enter twice, otherwise the quote quick way won't work. Okay, so I'm going to type TR, enter, enter. Now, what the enter, enter does is it allows AutoCAD to sort of sense a boundary where those lines will be trimmed off. So the enter, enter says, hey, if you touch this line and you click, it's going to be trimmed off where it meets the circle, okay? And if I hover over this line, you'll see that AutoCAD is sensing a cutting boundary at that circle. If I come inside this circle and I hover over that one, right, AutoCAD is saying this line is going to be trimmed off at this circle. Okay, so I can hover over a lot of different objects. When I press enter twice after initiating trim, it becomes very dynamic. I can just start trimming things off. Okay, so I can click, I can click, I can click, I can click, and all of those objects are trimmed off. Okay, escape, escape. So how does that help us in this scenario here? Well, if I have these pieces that are extra, I can TR, enter, enter, hover over the piece that needs to be trimmed, click, click, and it trims off. Okay? Okay, I'm going to hit undo, undo, enter, 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 and I'm just going to undo what I've just done over here. Okay? And I want to talk about a few issues with the idea of trimming that direction. Okay? TR, enter, enter. The idea of trimming this way is very easy. It's simple to use. It's very functional. It works really well. But it's a tool that just continues to go, and it doesn't care what it's trimming. So if I came over here and I accidentally hovered over this and clicked when I really meant to get this, right, it's going to trim that piece off. Whoops. If I hover there, whoops, right? If I hover and click there, whoops. So I do have the ability, we'll say ability, to accidentally trim things that I shouldn't have with this command, okay? So you just really have to pay attention to what you're doing when you're using it. Just make sure that you hover over the correct thing, okay? Let AutoCAD sense a good boundary. In this case, trimming off this little line, AutoCAD is automatically sensing this longer line here as the cutting edge, right? So it's going to be trimmed off at that line. Click, click, and trim works really well. Escape. I'm going to undo again. Undo, enter. Okay. Now, the long way of going about trim is you inputting the definition of the trim, the trimming boundary. Okay, so if I type TR enter one time, it says select all of the objects, or, so I'm going to select an object to trim. I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm going to pick where I need to trim it off. So essentially what I'm doing, and I don't think I phrased that very well, but essentially what I'm doing with trim, if I want to manually identify the trimming point, I type TR, enter, I select the boundary, the cutting boundary. So instead of AutoCAD automatically sensing it, I select a cutting boundary, I hit enter to sort of put it in place, right, to solidify it, to finalize it. And then I come back and I can trim things off. Do you see objects that don't sort of intersect that cutting boundary don't get trimmed off, right? So I've really sort of said, hey, this is my cutting boundary. I want to trim off this piece and this piece. But now AutoCAD is not automatically sensing a trimming boundary. So other objects that I kind of on the fly want to trim, that won't be allowed, okay? So I could click, click, escape, 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 TR, enter. Let's select another cutting boundary. If I want to get rid of this line, I have to choose this as my cutting edge, hit enter, hover, click, escape. Whoops, I accidentally got rid of that. We'll talk about how to fix that in a second, okay? By and large, I very rarely choose the first option, or the second option we just illustrated. I always type TR, enter, enter, and I just allow AutoCAD to automatically sense a cutting edge, and I just click at will, right? The only reason that I would ever kind of manually choose a cutting boundary is because the quick method wasn't working, okay? So that's kind of my fallback if something's not working. But otherwise, TR, enter, enter, and we're just going to trim away, okay? So TR, enter, enter, and we can trim. I can trim in sequence. I click 2 times and I just trimmed. Now I get over here and it's saying, hey, I can't trim that. And you're thinking, well, it's, you know, my cutting edge is this circle. This is kind of a common mistake that happens. Escape, escape. The reason I can't trim that is because it's just a little line segment, right? It's not really intersecting this. It's just resting upon it. It's not going over the edge. And so to get rid of something like this, I would select it and I would hit delete. okay? Undo, enter, enter, enter again, trim, TR, enter, enter. So we can trim, click, trim, click, trim, click. Ooh, I can't trim those because they're just line pieces, right? Again, they're not going over the boundary. They're just little line segments, so I'm going to delete those, okay? TR, enter, enter. I could even trim that top of that circle off, right? It's trimming at this boundary. I could trim off that piece. I could trim off that piece. I could trim this. Really, oh, there's nothing intersecting it, so I can't trim that, okay? But that's how you're going to use trim. Now, the opposite of trim is extend, okay? And the idea of extend is that you can take one object and extend it to a second object. Now, with that in mind, the first object does have to be able to extend out and meet the second object, even if it's just at an endpoint, okay? So for example, if I extend this, do you see it will extend and it will touch the endpoint of that second line. But if I were to move that line back a little bit, let me do that. It's getting really fussy with me here. There we go. And this line then wouldn't meet that one. Do you see how there's nothing to extend to? My extend would not work, right? It doesn't function. Okay, I'm gonna hit undo. There we go. But essentially extend is really the opposite of trim, okay? It extends objects out as opposed to trimming them off. So extend is contained here. We have extend, right? I can also type EX, and this command is very similar to trim, where if I hit enter twice, so EX, enter, enter, it's an on-demand command, right? So, and it just keeps going. So it senses a boundary to extend to, and if I click, it extends to it, okay? If I come over here and I hover over this line, it will extend, click, and because there's another boundary out here, I could hover over it again and click, and it extends to it, and I could just continue on until there's nothing else that it can sense, okay? So extend will allow you to extend one object to another. If I wanted to then trim this, I could TR, enter, enter, trim, 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 escape, EX, extend, enter, enter, extend, extend, extend. There we go. It would even extend out further, right? It just keeps going. It senses a boundary, okay? It will only sense that boundary if it's on the screen. Do you see how it won't sense that triangle over there now that it's not on the screen? But the second I bring it onto the screen, it does sense it. Okay. All right. I'm going to trim, TR, enter, enter. I don't have to just pick to trim or extend either. I can use a selection window, so you can see now it goes away. Okay. The long version of extend is the same as trim. So I can type EX and I can hit enter one time. Okay. I can select a line I want to extend my other line to. I can select a boundary, click, enter, and now I have forced this line object to go to that. Okay, escape, U, undo, enter. Okay, EX, enter once. I select my objects, I hit enter, and now you're going to see this line bypass that first triangle and go to the second triangle, right? Because I've defined it to only want to travel to this point. It doesn't hit anything in between, okay? Click. There we go. Escape, escape. Very, very similar to trim. Extend is very similar to trim, right? Again, with this command, I very rarely use kind of the long version where I define a specific point for these to extend to. Usually what happens is I just EX, enter, enter, and I start extending, okay? So in this case, I could come over here, and where there's a gap, okay, I could EX, enter, enter, and I could extend that line over, and it's fixed, okay? Now, the problem with extend is that I can't extend into space, all right? So I can't type EX, enter, enter, and extend this or this into space to create a squared off corner here, okay? And this is where another command comes into play, and it's called fillet, okay? We have trim. that will trim off excess lines. We have extend that will extend lines to another piece of geometry, right? And then we have fillet that will take two objects and create a squared off corner. So fillet is really trim and extend in one command, okay? If I wanted to use extend here, I would have to have kind of a line out in space, which is okay. And I could EX, enter, enter, and extend it out to something, extend it out to there, and then I would have to TR, trim, enter, enter, trim that off, escape, escape, delete my excess piece of geometry, and I have what I want, right? So I can do that, but it's just a lot of work, right? I'm gonna hit undo here. Undo, enter, 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 there we go. Fillet will allow me to do that in one command, essentially, okay? So fillet is right here, fillet, and the shortcut is F, I believe it's just F actually. F for fillet, yep, that's right, okay? So if I type F, enter, I can use the fillet command, or if I come up here and click on fillet, I can initiate the fillet command, okay? But essentially what fillet will allow me to do, and it actually is kind of, it will do two things, okay? Fillet will allow me to create a squared off corner, but it will also allow me to create a rounded corner, okay? So for example, in this case, this is a wall, right? And I want to create a squared off 90-degree corner so that it functions the way it should on a floor plan drawing, right? This is what it should look like in a floor plan drawing. What will define if a fillet rounds a corner or makes it squared off is the radius that you specify. A 0 radius will create a squared off corner, and then something like a 1-inch radius will create a 1-inch rounded corner, okay? Things that you will use a rounded corner for, let's talk about that. For all of you civil engineers out there, right, the perfect example of using a rounded corner would be a curb cut, okay? So here are some drawings, right? And if we look at them, hopefully this takes me where I want it to take me. We can see it here though, anyway. You can see these lines are drawn and they come and they round and then it goes down, right? Let's see. Yeah, we were looking there. Here's a really good axonometric drawing of this where it comes in at a straight line and then it kind of rounds and then it goes straight again, right? So those, there's kind of the perfect example of where a rounded corner would work for you, okay? All right, so let's talk about how to achieve those, all right? So the fillet command, if I type F, enter, okay? The way that we specify that radius is by clicking on radius right here. I could also type R, enter. So the current setting, which is seen right here, it says the radius is 0, okay? So what that means is that if I select line number 1, click, and line number 2, click, I get a squared off corner, okay? Radius of 0 equals a squared off corner. I'm gonna hit undo, enter, okay? F for fillet, enter. Got away from me there for a second. Click once, click twice, and I have a squared off corner. Undo. Okay. So F for fillet, enter, and if I specify a radius of something like, I want to do 3 inches, so I type 3, enter, okay. I click my first line, click my second line, and I did not get my 3-inch radius, did I? F for fillet, radius, 3 inches, enter, there we go. There we go. You see it start to round. I think I just didn't tell AutoCAD I was going to input a radius, honestly. Okay, I'm going to hit undo now. F for fillet, enter. I have to pick radius or I type R, enter. Specify the fillet radius. Let's do 6 inches, enter. Click once, click twice, and it's done. Okay, so fillet essentially is initiating the command, specifying a radius, and then clicking 2 lines that you want to be defined with a rounded corner. Okay, now it doesn't matter if the lines are that they don't meet. Okay, so this is an example of lines that don't meet. Okay, so if the lines are like this, you can fillet them. Okay, if the lines look like this, you can also fillet them. Okay, F for fillet, enter. Now I want to show you something. It remembers, AutoCAD remembers the radius that I had previously input. Okay, so this says 6 inches. If I wanted it to be 0, I would type R, or I would click on radius, type 0, enter, and click once, click a second time, and it cleans that up. Okay, so it's really, in this case, it was trim and extend in one command, right? But that's what we're going to use fillet for. Now, one thing I really want to point out here is that this wall is 5.5 inches from, or maybe it's 6 inches from this line on this wall, I should say, is 5.5 or 6 inches from the first line. Okay, so when I input a radius of 6 inches in here, so F for fillet, enter, R for radius, enter, 6 inches, enter, right? A lot of input, not difficult, but you just have to remember that. Because these lines are 6 inches apart, right, that fillet looks wonderful, okay? But if I do F for fillet, enter, R for radius, enter, and I type in something like 10 foot, enter, okay, I get an error. I was going to say it might work, but I was hoping it wouldn't, right? It says the fillet is too large, right? So something like 10 feet, you know, is very large in proportion to a wall that is 6 inches in width, okay? So when you're using fillet and a radius, you have to think about the scale of the objects you're working with. You know, something like F for fillet, enter, R for radius, enter, maybe 1/4 inch, enter, is going to be very small compared to something that is 6 inches apart, right? So if you're looking at this from far away, you would look at that and think, nothing happened. The fillet command didn't work. When actually it did. It was just the radius was so small that it's hard to detect because of the scale of the objects. Okay, so when you're creating a radius and you're using the fillet command, you have to think about how big the objects you're working with are when you're specifying that. Just to make sure that you can see it well. You know, it's not too big and it's not too small. Okay. So that is fillet. We've talked about trim. We've talked about extend. We've talked about fillet. Okay. I want to talk about chamfer. Chamfer functions very much in the same way that fillet does, but instead of a radius occurring, you get a diagonal line. Okay. So something like, ooh, this one doesn't have a diagonal line. There's a fillet on our little toilet right there though, right? I guess our toilet doesn't have a chamfer, but let me show you what it looks like, okay? So chamfer will create a diagonal line, all right? Fillet, there's chamfer, okay? So it bevels, that's the proper word, it bevels the edge. Okay, so if I click on chamfer, it's going to say select your first line or specify, we want to specify the distance, okay? And really the way that this functions, let me draw a rectangle and show you how this chamfer functions, okay? The distance is going to be from the point up and a point over, all right? So let me make a little graphic here. A chamfer, if you say I want it up a distance of 2 inches and over a distance of 2 inches, then AutoCAD will create a chamfer that is up 2 inches and over 2 inches. TR, enter, enter. I'm just going to trim that out to show you what it looks like, right? And I didn't get this quite precise, but that is essentially how the distance works. So from this point up 2 inches, this point over 2 inches, we're going to get a diagonal line, and that's going to be the chamfer, okay? So I'm going to chamfer, and I want to choose my distance. Let's do 2, enter. Second chamfer distance, 2, enter. select my first line, select my second line, right? And essentially from whatever this point out here was, it's up 2 inches and it's over 2 inches, and that's how my chamfer is working, okay? I'll be honest and say that I cannot remember the last time I used chamfer. This is very rarely used, although I think it's a good skill to have. Okay, so even though we don't use it very often, you know, it is something that you want to know how to do. And really, I think probably if I were to give you an example of where I use chamfer, it would be in creating blocks, okay, which we're going to talk about in a couple weeks. But for example, a toilet is an example of a block. And the reason I would use chamfer would be to add detail to that, okay? So this has a filleted corner here, but maybe we could chamfer it to give it just a little bit more detail, okay? But really that's chamfer. I can specify a distance to chamfer something. Let's do another chamfer over here on my little rectangle, okay? So I have chamfer, and I come down here, and to specify how large that chamfer is, I'm going to choose distance. I could also choose angle, okay, but I'm just going to choose distance for now, and we'll do something like 4 inches for the first distance, enter. 4 inches for the second distance, enter. Pick line 1, pick line 2, and there's my chamfer. Okay. Now again, chamfer is a lot like fillet, where if I had chosen a distance of 30 feet by 30 feet, right, and this object here is only 2 feet by 2 feet, the chamfer wouldn't work because it's too large for the object I'm going to use it on, right? So again, just like fillet, you have to really think about what you're using it on and how large to make it so that it will function on the object, okay? All right, so we have fillet, we have chamfer, we have trim and extend, okay? I want to talk about, we've already talked about mirror. I want to talk about polygon and polyline next, okay? Polylines are really very simple, polygons, and I'm going to delete these few actually polygons that I have in here. A polygon is really going to be anything with, you know, an object with multiple sides. So 2 sides, or not 2 sides, 3 sides, 4 sides, 5 sides, 6 sides. Those are all going to be polygons, okay? And let's see here. Our polygon command is up here on the draw toolbar. So if I click down under rectangle, there is polygon, okay? And I can also start typing in polygon, and it will initiate the command. But essentially, polygon, I initiate the command, I enter the number of sides for my polygon. So let's say, you know, in the case of 4, it would be a rectangle or a square, but let's do 6, okay, and I hit enter, and it says specify the center point of your polygon. So I'm going to click, and I have 2 options, inscribed or circumscribed polygons, okay? I'm going to hit escape and just let AutoCAD show us the difference between those two. Essentially, a inscribed polygon is the graphic on the left. So it's inscribed inside of a circle, okay? And a circumscribed polygon is the one on the right, and that means that the polygon is generated on the outside of a circle, okay? I guess really the difference between the two would be maybe if you had a circle on the screen and you wanted to create a polygon, you would choose to create it on the inside of a circle or on the outside of a circle, right? Other than that one example, you know, really the size of your polygon is going to be controlled by what you input, okay? So I think the idea of inscribed versus circumscribed is if you have something on your screen already and you want to draw around it, okay? Because you can really control the dimension of your polygon by what you input, essentially, okay? I guess my point is I don't really think it's a big deal which one you choose as long as you get the dimension that you need for your polygon, okay? So I'm going to click on polygon again. I'm going to enter the number of sides, 6, enter, specify the center point, click. I'm going to choose just inscribed for this case because it doesn't really matter. And we're going to give it a radius. So our radius will be 3 foot enter, and I get my 3-foot radius, which is the radius, not the diameter. So this is 6 foot in diameter, but it's a hexagon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. I can RO rotate it, right? I can rotate it if I need to, right? Get it wherever I need it to be. I can copy it, move it, delete it, do whatever I need to do, okay? But essentially, that's how you're going to create a polygon. And this is going to be kind of important because you're going to be creating some of these objects for your assignment, okay? This is the offset assignment, and you're going to be doing this. You're going to be drawing circles. You're going to be offsetting circles, right? We're going to offset here. If you wanted to draw a triangle or a big triangle, for this one, that would be a 3-sided polygon, and you would trim out the pieces that you don't need, essentially, right? So for your assignment, this is going to be pretty important to learn. Okay, so polygon, P-O-L-Y-G-O-N, polygon, enter the number of sides. Let's do 3, enter, and specify the center, click, and I'm just going to specify a radius now. You see how it's rotating freely? I want it to be straight, so I'm going to press F8 to get it straight. My ortho turned on. Let's do 4 foot, enter, and there we go. Okay. One thing, you know, by specifying that radius, even though this is a triangle, it is based upon a circle. So, so these objects are based on a circle, whether it's inscribed or circumscribed. Okay. If I needed to create a second triangle, right, that's upside down so that I could create a star, I could do that, rotate it, right? I could CO, copy, enter, copy it down, RO, enter, rotate, enter, click the middle, rotate it, right, MO, move. No, sorry, that didn't feel right. M for move, enter, right? I can move this up if I needed to. TR, enter, enter, trim. I can start trimming out a few of these things if I needed, right? Okay. So, you know, the idea now is that you have quite a few drawing commands and quite a few modification commands under your belt. And just in that one example, you saw me draw a polygon, rotate it, copy it, trim out pieces. So we're going to really start using all of these commands together to create things, right? Which I know sounds very simple. You're like, oh yeah, I'm going to use all my commands now together to create things. But it's hard to remember that. I remember when I was a beginning AutoCAD student, I knew the commands, I knew how to use them, but it was very foreign to use them together, right? And I think I just forgot about it. I forgot that I didn't have to create a second polygon, that I could just copy a first one, and I could then rotate it, and then I could move it, and then I could trim it. Okay? All right. So we now know, we know quite a few commands. Polylines, I'm hoping that you remember polylines. Polylines are pretty simple. They function just like lines. The one thing I did want to remind you about with polylines is the p-edit, which is to take a polyline or lines that have been separated or broken apart or created separately and join them together. Okay, so polyline, you know, it functions just like a line. Okay. Oop, I have a setting on. Sorry, let me get rid of it. Width. I have a setting on here. It is a width, and I want that to be 0. See how there's a thickness there. 0, enter. Okay. So polyline. Oop, no. 0, enter, 0. Enter. There we go, finally. Okay. So there's my polyline. I've created 3 segments and it's all one piece. But what happens when PL polyline, I create one length, enter again to initiate that same command, and I create a second length, and they're separate pieces, right? This is a polyline, this is a polyline, but they're separate pieces. Or I create lines, L-I-N-E, enter, right? And I click, 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 and I have a line here, and I have a line here, okay? I want to remind you of p-edit, which is polyline edit, and it will work on polylines that have been separated, and it will also work on line segments that were never created as a whole, okay? So p-edit, polyline edit, enter. Select polyline or M for multiple, click on multiple, and select all of the lines that you want to join together. Okay, now those lines have to have a common point. So if I selected these two lines would join together, these two lines would join together, but they would not connect to one another. Okay, lines that you use polyline edit on have to be connected, they have to touch. Okay, so p-edit, enter, M for multiple, enter, select your objects. I've selected both of my objects, I hit enter. Convert your lines to polylines. Click on yes or hit enter. I want to join them. Click on join. I'm going to hit enter, enter again, and it's finished. I see here at my command line it says one segment was added to the polyline, and that's all one piece. Okay. Here is another example, one line escape, two line escape, p-edit, enter. Okay, I can click on multiple or just hit enter. Select my lines, hit enter, and I want to, obviously it's here, but I'm very used to coming down to here, join. I want to join, click, enter, enter again, and we're done. Okay, so that is polyline edit. Okay, so we've reviewed selection methods, mirror, rotate, offset. We have talked about fillet and chamfer, polygons and polylines, trim and extend, and mirror. We have a couple things left that I want to talk about. We're going to talk about point, divide, and measure. Measure we've already talked about, but I would really like to go back over that one more time. And then we have stretch, which stretch may actually end up being its own video. Okay, so point, divide, and measure. Measure, let's talk about measure first. So we've talked about measure a little bit, and it is over here. It's under the home tab, okay, and it's all the way down here under utilities. But measure is essentially a way for you to measure things a bunch of different ways, okay, to figure out the dimension of objects in AutoCAD. So we have quick. So if I use the little drop down, we have quick, which will allow me to hover over things and very quickly see what the dimensions are, right? So super helpful. We get these temporary dimensions that graphically just, visually show us things, which is amazing, okay? So we have quick. If I click down, we have distance, which will allow me to click once, click a second time, and get a distance of an object, okay? Now, measure is just a temporary thing. It doesn't set a dimension. It doesn't change things. It just visually shows us what these objects are measuring at. So if I click on measure, we have radius, angle, area, and volume. So if I click on area, right, specify a first point. If I outline an area, you see how my third point, my fourth point, my fifth point there, and I hit enter, right? It shows me the area. So super helpful when you're trying to estimate, how much material you need for a specific area. So measure encompasses a lot of different things, right? It's not just measuring linear distances, it's also showing me things like area and volume, okay? Volume will have a height, which we're not really worried about that just yet. But essentially that's what measure will do, right? Distances, and radius, angle, and area of different things, okay? There's not really a way to compute areas within AutoCAD. Like I can't save these and have them, like what is the area of this plus the area of that? Well, I can't really do that just yet, but I can say area, and I can come over here and I can start clicking different points and figure out what the area is, okay? There we go. We're almost there. Click, enter, and it's 27 square feet essentially. Okay, so that's measure. You somewhat knew about measure from, you know, previous exercises. The option that I chose last is going to be the one that is illustrated when I, for example, type in measure at the command line, right? So MEASURE, enter. The one that was, oh no, I'm not, there we go. It's going to do the quick measure actually. Oh, I have, no. If I type in measure, it's just going to do a quick measure, obviously. The quick measure here, I think, is really kind of helpful. Like, that's a lot of good information that I can visually see very quickly. One thing I really like about this is that it shows me the corners are squared, right? Meaning they're orthogonal, they're 90 degrees, which also sort of insinuates that my lines are straight, right? One of the biggest mistakes that I find in beginning students' work is crooked lines, right? So if you're ever wondering if your lines are perfectly straight, use measure, right? This quick measure will tell you very quickly if they are or they are not, right? Because I see, for example, here I have a 60-degree angle right there. Okay. All right, let's talk about point and divide, and I think that will end this video, and stretch will become its own video. Okay. So point, I want to talk about the idea of a point, all right? And the idea of a point, so under the utilities menu over here, if I click down, I have a point style, ID point, and then point style. Okay, if I click on point style, click, I get this little dialog box, okay? So I have these graphic indicators of points in AutoCAD. And if I were to compare a point in AutoCAD to a pixel, that would be a very good comparison. Okay, so a point in AutoCAD is a 0 width, 0 length little dot in space that can mark things. That's really what it is. Okay, and I compare it to a pixel, right? Because one pixel is just one little dot of something, like in Photoshop. Okay, these are indicators. All right, and right now the point style is set to just be one little dot here, okay? And the reason I'm showing you these is because when I show you the next command, which is divide, divide uses points to indicate segments within an object or on an object you're dividing, okay? So right now, if it's clicked to look like this, it's just one little teeny bitty dot. If it's set like that, I'm going to see a circle around the point. If it's set to be like this, I'm going to see a little tick mark where a point should be. Okay, so I'm going to hit OK here really quick, and I'm going to type point, enter, and if I click, I just placed a point, enter, click, placed a point. And points, they're just teeny little pieces of geometry that mark things. It's a little marker, right? So now if I come back up to utilities, and I click on point style, okay, if I click on this and hit OK, you see they changed to round dots, all right? So this point style is really just showing how those are going to be illustrated in your drawing, okay? But again, they're just little markers, okay? They're not geometry you want to use all the time unless you want to say mark the center point of this visually so that you can do something else. So I'm going to type point, enter. If I wanted to mark the midpoint of this line, oop, it looks like my midpoint snap got turned off somehow. I could come up here and I could click on that and it marks the midpoint, right? Enter to reinitiate the point command, click. Enter to reinitiate, click. Enter to reinitiate, click. There we go, okay? So points are just little indicators, they're little markers. And the question first initially you might have is, well, if this is a point and that's a point, why does that one look bigger than that one? And it's because I was zoomed in further when I generated these. Okay, they were actually the same size as these when I generated them, but with these I was zoomed out further, so the scale of them is larger. Okay, points really depend on where you're at in your screen to make them look the way that they look. One really kind of, we'll say, one command that really uses points, and really one of the only command that uses points to help it, is called divide. Okay. And I'm going to show you how to use divide, and I'm going to use a circle to illustrate how to use divide. Circle, CI circle. I'm just going to create a circle here. And I'm showing you this because one of your assignments will be to draw a circle. And probably the easiest way to create this star would be to divide the circle into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different segments, okay? And we want those to be equal segments. Okay. Divide will allow you to take any piece of geometry in AutoCAD and to divide it into equal parts, okay? And when I say divide it into equal parts, I don't mean that it's going to break it into pieces. I mean that points are going to be placed on that object at equal increments so that you can see those points and then draw from those, okay? So divide, let's see here. Oop, here's a good, let's press F1 here. Okay, let's find our divide icon. So D-I-V-I-D-E, enter. I pressed F1 to get the help menu. Divide command. Okay, click, and let's find it. The button is hidden behind another palette. Okay, let's look here. Oop, it looks like this. Sorry guys, I don't use it very often, honestly. This is break. We have divide here. It's DIV for the keyboard shortcut. Okay, so it's actually under the draw tool palette here. So if I click on find, it's not really showing me because it is hidden in this tool palette. But let me just tell you, divide is over here. So I click on the little down arrow where there's divide, and this really shows you how it functions. But if I click on divide, okay, and I select an object to divide, oops, I select an object to divide, which would be the circle, it's going to ask me how many segments I want to break it up into. And in this case, I want it to be 5 equal segments, so I type 5, enter, and a point is placed at those 5 equal segments, okay? Now, you'll see that the circle is still cohesive. It's all one piece, right? But a marker has just been placed at each one of those points so that I can use it to draw to, all right? So now if I type in, or I go to utilities and I click on point style, I could even change this to be just a circle or a little point in space, right? But now I can use, for example, the line command. Oop, that kind of got away from me there, didn't it? I can use the line command, for example, L-I-N-E, and I could draw. Oop, I'm not snapping to it. This is a node, okay? So I need to change my object snaps to snap to a node. So now I can click and I can use this and I can snap to these different nodes, and look at that. I can draw a circle, or not a circle, I can draw a star within that circle, right? TR, enter, enter, trim. And I can trim out those interior pieces, and I can rotate it, RO, enter. I'm just guessing here. I'm not sure what angle, but probably, oh, there we go. Rotate, click, and there's my star, okay? Looks very much like that lovely star right there that we need for our assignment, okay? And I was able to use divide to achieve that, essentially. So divide again, I'm going to use the line tool to show you what it does, okay? I can click on, I can type in divide, or I can go to the icon. So I click on draw, I can click on divide here, or I can type in div, enter divide, select the object to divide, select or enter the number of segments. Let's do 4, enter, and now I get 1, 2, 3 points on here that then divides that object into 1, 2, 3, 4 different segments, okay? So that's what divide will allow you to do. And when you're done, you want to just select those points / nodes and delete them because they will print, which we don't want them to. Essentially, you just use them, and then when you're finished, you delete them, okay? So I'm going to delete these off of here so that they are gone, and I have my lovely circle with the star inside. And you notice that I am using a blue selection window to grab those, and now it looks the way it should. Okay, so just to kind of review, we have reviewed our, we have learned our fillet and chamfer. We have learned polygon and reviewed polylines in p-edit, trim and extend, point, divide, and measure. And that will end this video. And then our third video will be on stretch and grips. Okay, thanks guys.